What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over my rest of these rankings, looking at the players who have fallen the most over the last 2 weeks. You can always see exactly where I have every player ranked by just looking at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And remember, you can now use those rankings as a trade calculator, just looking at the value columns. You can try and figure out the best trades for your specific team. So we'll go over the biggest fallers in a second, but first, of course, have to start things off as usual. The stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was through week 9, which wide receiver currently ranks last in yards after the catch per reception. The answer is Marquez Callaway. Sox Ward was the first to get that right on YouTube, and at Birch 1982 was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. Through Sunday, who has the most carries among tight ends? All right, so we'll start off with the tight end position, where again we see very little movement. No tight end fell more than one spot inside the top 10. The top 10 is pretty locked in at this point. And then only Noah Fant did so in the top 17, and he only fell 2 spots. That drop was not only because he was set to miss, of course, this last week, being placed on the COVID list, but we expect him back next week. But also Albert O returning to the lineup isn't going to bump Fant down to the second tight end. It's just going to take away some tight end targets. So if he was going to get maybe 7 targets in a game, that's bumped down to 5 or 6. Albert O isn't going to have this massive role in the receiving game, but he'll be there, take away some looks, and then obviously decreases the value of Fant. I think that just coupled with being placed on the COVID list for this week brought him down. But that that top 12 is fairly locked in at this point. Really no other fallers worth mentioning. Kittle obviously goes way up in value after returning this last week, looking fantastic in doing so. But of course, there's a fallers video. We're going to touch on him next week in the risers video. At the quarterback position, literally nothing has changed as far as big fallers are concerned. One thing that did change was I shifted around the top 4, and so I figured that would be fun to go over instead of just saying no one really changed. The new ranking I have for the top 4 quarterbacks are Josh Allen 1, Lamar Jackson 2, Kyler Murray 3, and then Patrick Mahomes 4, with Brady remaining at 5. I could see swapping Brady and Mahomes. The Chiefs' offense has looked pretty bad at points this season. Of course, Brady's having a phenomenal year. So if you want to flip them, go for it. Realistically, it doesn't matter that much. No one is really deciding between having Brady and Mahomes on the same team in one quarterback league and trying to figure out who to trade. It's kind of irrelevant what the exact ranking is there. But those two are right next to each other. I could see that going either way. And I could see, next week if Mahomes struggles again, Brady has another nice game, I could see Brady jumping over him as well. Lamar has definitely been trending up, and he's getting his wide receiver core healthy now. Of course, Bateman coming back. Bateman looking really, really good. I could see ranking Lamar at 1 ahead of Josh Allen, but I think that would be a little bit of recency bias. Allen was, of course, really bad this last week, but he was the quarterback 1 overall in each of the previous 2 games that he played, and he's been top 4 in 4 of his last 5. So it was really just this 1 week that's been bad for Josh Allen. Lamar was the quarterback 1 this last week, but he was top 4 only once in his previous 5. Of course, I just said Josh Allen was 4 times in his previous 5. So I still think Josh Allen deserves to be the number 1 quarterback rest of season. But again, we're splitting hairs here, right? They're both phenomenal options. They're both guys that are going to carry you to the playoffs, carry you in the playoffs. I'm not overly concerned with Josh Allen. We are actually going to touch on that situation a little bit. We go over Diggs, so Diggs will be one of the fallers for wide receivers. But ultimately, even with the struggles that he had this last week and the likelihood that teams kind of implement a similar strategy that Jacksonville has going forward, I still think Josh Allen is the number 1 quarterback rest of the season. Again, I'll touch on that again when we go over wide receivers. But we go in order in this video, so we'll go over running backs first, and we'll start off with Ezekiel Elliott, down 4 spots to the running back 10. Zeke was on heater in weeks 2 through 5. He had 6 touchdowns in those 4 weeks, but he hasn't scored since week 5. Honestly, the drop for Zeke is nothing really to do with himself or the offense. The offense is still great. He's still going to score touchdowns, get receptions, yards. He's still going to be great in fantasy. It's more just that McCaffrey comes back from his hamstring injury. Chubb returns from his calf injury while also having Kareem Hunt out, and so Chubb leapfrogs him. We see Barkley coming back soon. He goes ahead of him. So it's really more that other running backs are getting healthy and going back to their original ranking, and that Zeke just gets leapfrogged. It's nothing that Zeke did to like tank his ranking. It's just that other guys are coming back. Still a quality option, still a must start every week. His exact ranking among the running back ones is just going to be based on matchup, really. He's going to be must start, though. Aaron Jones down 4 spots, running back 12. Fairly similar reasoning. Of course, we're getting these running backs healthy that are going to be more valuable than Aaron Jones. But this one also mixes in the fact that A.J. Dillon has looked really, really good. And he has eaten to and will continue to eat into Aaron Jones' workload. And that obviously hurts his ceiling, hurts his floor. Right? The ceiling is much higher when you're consistently getting 20 touches and work on the receiving game and all of the goal line. Well, that's not happening. And of course, the floor also gets lowered when you have games like we saw this last week. If, Rodgers were to miss more time than just this last week, if they were to face a really good run defense and he only gets, 12 opportunities, well, the floor is going to be much lower. Jones is only averaging 4.5 more carries per game than Dillon. Obviously, Aaron Jones has more work in the receiving game, but like anyone watching this game knows that Dillon's looked really, really good. He has, and he deserves the touches he's getting. This isn't a situation where they're like just giving pity touches. Like it's like Carlos Hyde. We're going to talk about James Robinson in a second here. The fact that they give Carlos Hyde touches when both these guys are healthy, sometimes at least, is ridiculous, right? Obviously, James Robinson's better. That's not the case really in Green Bay. Dillon deserves the touches he's getting, and honestly should probably be used more than he is, especially near the goal line. And so there's absolutely a chance that that does come true towards the end of the season, but even if it doesn't, he's eating into the workload, and so I had to downgrade Aaron Jones. Talking about James Robinson, he's down 5 spots, running back 15. Well, this was more because of the injury. Gets hurt, misses this week. I think he's going to be back very soon. I don't think he's going to miss much time. It doesn't seem like a major injury, but of course he got hurt, and anyone who gets hurt is going to have to drop in the rankings. Also, the Jaguars are awful, and they're also not very intelligent. They're not going to be competitive late in the season. And when all these things are happening, like it just opens up potential paths for, they have games where they don't score many points, and so he doesn't get touchdowns. Maybe they're tanking to close the season and they use more Carlos Hyde. Maybe he has this injury and it's more long-term than we think. Like, as you open up all these paths towards disappointing performances, it's going to decrease someone's value because those are all possibilities, and now the floor gets lowered. But when he's healthy, when he's clearly getting the workload, he's running back 1. It's just that we don't know how many weeks that's going to happen going forward. Miles Sanders down 13 spots, the running back 34. He dropped a ton, of course, after the injury. When you're placed on the IR, you're going to drop a lot of spots. But now, Jordan Howard is also a thing, which is going to be a blast. Jordan Howard is not a good running back, but he has to have like some sort of like ownership stake in the Eagles organization because they love him, especially near the goal line. And they have already come out and said he's going to have a role even when Miles Sanders is back, and I 100% believe them. I would not be shocked if Miles Sanders is used a lot, on early downs, on third downs, but then we have Gainwell mixing in some third downs. We have Jordan Howard sometimes on early downs, Jordan Howard taking touchdowns, and if that's going to be a thing to close the season, you have to tank the value of Miles Sanders. Like, I do think Miles Sanders returns very shortly or right after he's eligible to return. I don't believe it's a long-term injury, but that is still, a few weeks away. And if he's going to lose receptions, lose early down work, lose goal line work, it's like the upside is not even close to what it was before, and he wasn't even doing that phenomenally before. This is more of a ground-based attack now than when he was injured, and so that's a positive for Miles Sanders, but he's not going to be an elite fantasy producer when he comes back, and so you have to downgrade him, especially because he's hurt right now. Mike Davis has dropped another 5 spots. The running back 44 seems to drop every single week. He gained 13 yards on 9 carries, caught one of his 2 targets for 5 yards this last week. He, for some reason, still plays like more than half the snaps, but there's just no reason for them to keep doing that. At some point, like, they're not going to give all this workload to Patterson because they have to use Patterson as a receiver at parts because they have no like talent at the wide receiver position. But I still don't think like to close the season that Mike Davis is going to be like the lead like running back for this team, or even like the lead back behind Patterson. He's just been so bad. He wasn't good last season, hasn't been good this season. I just still think they're going to bring in another running back and give them more work. I doubt anyone watching this actually like has him or is relying on him because he was an avoid in the rest of season rankings. I trash him every week. But if for some reason you do still have Mike Davis at this point, I genuinely just like, don't know what to tell you anymore. He's not a good running back. Alex Collins, also down 6 spots, running back 47. This one has some variance to it because this Carson injury, like, we have been lied to for so long. I have no idea what this injury is going to end up being, what it has been, what it's going to be going forward. All I know is he's set to return very soon. It seems like he's going to return very soon. And when Carson does come back, I mean, Alex Collins has not been that fantastic in fantasy. He has over 8 fantasy points in 2 of his 5 games since taking over. He's not that reliable of an option. He has 2 receptions of the last 3 weeks. And so he hasn't even been that good without Carson. Once Carson returns, he's going to have absolutely no value. And so at this point, like, his value has tanked. On to the wide receiver position. We'll start off with Diggs, as we alluded to before, down 3 spots to the wide receiver 9. Diggs is 10th in targets, 14th in receiving yards. That's really good, but 21st in fantasy points per game. He's been very consistent. He's had like one game you could call a dud, but like a true dud he still has not had yet this season. He's been really good. It's just that the ceiling hasn't been there. They've struggled to connect deep this season specifically, and teams moving forward, they've already like started to do this, but the Jaguars really did it, is just what teams are doing to both the Bills and the Chiefs. They're just saying, hey, you're not beating us over the top, right? We're not allowing these deep balls to be hit on us, and we're not allowing you guys to score, 14 points in a minute, right? To just have a deep touchdown, create a turnover, have a deep touchdown. That is what the Chiefs have done, the Bills have done over the past few seasons, and why it's been so successful is they've been able to attack deep downfield, and they've been very successful at doing that. But if teams are going to take that away, they need to adapt, right? The Bills are still trying to hit deep. The Chiefs are still trying to hit deep, and it's being unsuccessful because teams are taking it away. So the way to beat that for the Bills is to run the ball more effectively and to accept, the 5 to 7 yards the teams are giving them underneath. Is Josh Allen willing to do that? I don't know. I think he's going to be, able to do that. He's going to scramble more. We've seen him scrambling more in the past 2 weeks. If things are taken away deep, they're giving the underneath. Well, they're also giving the underneath carries to him, so he's going to scramble for a lot more yards. He had like 50 rushing yards this last week, kind of saved his fantasy day. But for Stefon Diggs, that's not great, because even though that reception floor is going to be there, if they're able to adapt and take the underneath receptions, we're going to have games where Diggs has like 10 for 100. He's going to have, at some point to close the season, 10 for 100 a touchdown. He's going to have that. But all these weeks where he's connecting for like 40, 50-yard balls seem to be taken away, and that's going to decrease his value because now he needs to have all these receptions to hit the value because he's not used a ton at the goal line, so he's not someone that they feature when they get close. They're more featuring Dawson Knox. They'll feature, honestly, Emmanuel Sanders. Josh Allen will run it in. It's not as much like Devonta Adams. When they get close, the ball just goes to Adams. Like Travis Kelce for the Chiefs, or even Tyreek Hill for the Chiefs. It's not the same way with Stefon Diggs, so he needs those receptions and yards to be there. So I've taken him down the rankings until the Bills are able to figure out how to attack teams when they're defending the way they have been. And we need to just see what happens as teams implement a strategy like Jacksonville did, because Jacksonville just beat them. They didn't allow a touchdown, and they were supposed to get absolutely annihilated. And so teams are going to look at that and be like, okay, let's do exactly what they did and see if Buffalo can adapt. And until they adapt, I think they will, but until they adapt, I have Diggs move down the rankings a little bit. DeAndre Hopkins, down 3 spots, wide receiver 15. He's hurt. I mean, that just happens. There's not really a ton of analysis goes into this. I have talked about how why he got moved down to more of like a low-end 1 to a high-end 2 over the last like 2 months, just that he is not going to be a target hog in this offense. Still has 0 games with double-digit targets, 0 games over 90 receiving yards. That is how this offense works. There's a lot of different people that are going to get the football, and they are not going to focus on one wide receiver, even if it's such an elite talent, DeAndre Hopkins. And now you add on a hamstring injury. Yeah, he's going to have to drop, but he's still wide receiver 2 rest of the season. Mike Williams, down 7 spots to wide receiver 17. Mike was the wide receiver 1 overall in half PPR scoring through week 5, and he's been the wide receiver 83 overall since then. He's gotten exactly 5 targets each week, only 2 receptions each week. Keenan Allen has commanded twice as many targets, has nearly 4 times as many receptions over that stretch. So it's not like this offense is falling apart. It's just that they're giving the ball a little bit more to Keenan Allen. Mike Williams is moving. So when we started the season, it was like, oh, he's in this Michael Thomas role. He's getting all these receptions plus downfield work. It's a little bit more shifting to we're going to feature Keenan Allen and use Mike Williams more downfield. That role has shifted a little bit. They're, of course, using Austin Eckler plenty. And so we thought he was going to be a consistent wide receiver 1. Not as much the case anymore. Moving him more into this wide receiver 2 range. He's still very valuable. Still has a very high weekly ceiling. Someone can just win you the week on his own. But because the floor is now consistently being hit more often, had to move him down. Terry McLaurin also down 3 spots, wide receiver 19. Although 3 spots in this range isn't like a ton. Just figured I'd mention him. He's now the wide receiver 18 in half PPR points per game. Despite all these targets, it's been a tough season, obviously, for McLaurin. He's down to 56% catch rate. He only has a career low 7.5 yards per target. And I'm not really seeing anything like improving moving forward. I don't expect the targets overall to increase much because he's already getting fed targets. And Curtis Samuel is going to come back at some point. So if those are going to stay the same, and I don't really see the efficiency going up. I don't expect Heineke to all of a sudden be like a Pro Bowler, right? Tyler Heineke's kind of what he is at this point. And so when you also mix in the fact that he does have the most difficult playoff schedule in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points to the wide receiver position, when we look at weeks 15, 16, 17, McLaurin has the most difficult, at least using data through week 8. I'll reassess that on Wednesday or Thursday, repost them to the website, who has the most difficult playoff matchups. But McLaurin through week 8 has the most difficult. And so when you have all that factored into, are they going to be competitive to close the season? Are they going to be tanking at that point? What is this offense going to look like? We don't really know. I think there's a lot of ambiguity, but I think that it's probably not increasing his value, right? He's kind of just been fine. He's had really good performances, but he's super streaky, and you almost don't know when these big games are coming. We thought he was going to explode against Kansas City. He goes out and posts a dud in a really good matchup. And so having bad matchups in the fantasy playoffs, not thinking the targets are going to increase, not thinking they're going to get more efficient, I figure we just bump him down a little bit. Still wide receiver 2, just more of a low end. Calvin Ridley, of course, had to drop him a ton over these last 2 weeks, down 19 spots, the wide receiver 34. You're just in a brutal spot if you have Calvin Ridley. He's going to miss at least the next 2 games, and he's first eligible to return against the Jaguars in week 12. If he did return them, he'd increase in value, of course. He'd be someone you're absolutely starting. The problem is you can't possibly know, right? And if someone tells you they know when Calvin Ridley's going to return, they're lying right to your face. Nobody knows. I'm not even sure Calvin Ridley himself knows for sure when he's coming back. If at all, this season. He might not return this season. Because of that, I think 34 is a good spot for him. Other wide receivers in this range are not weekly must starts, not players that you might ever start. For a lot of them, you're probably going to be moving them in and out of wide receiver 2 in the flex, but there are wide receivers in this 30 to 40 range where you legitimately might not start at all the rest of the season. Your team could be that good. And so I think that's a good spot to have him at. Someone that you're keeping on the bench, because you're for sure keeping Calvin Ridley in the bench, but someone you're just keeping on the bench saying, hey, he's got upside. Obviously, I'm not going to have him until week 12, but I'm not dropping him. I'm not trading him away for nothing unless you have to win now. If you basically have to win out, there's no reason to keep Calvin Ridley because he's not going to help you in the short term. So maybe you trade him then. But if you don't need to win out, you're still a competitive team, you think you can win without him, it's worth just keeping on the bench in that wide receiver 34, 35 range, because if he does come back, he's going to be really good. They have no talent on this team. Zacchaeus is not that good. Gage is not good. Taja Sharp is not good. And so when he comes back, he's going to be fed with targets again. Hopefully he comes back, though. He might not. And so you just have to understand that risk in having him. I also dropped Odell in the rankings, down 10 spots, the wide receiver 47. I do expect him to sign with a new team fairly soon. Maybe when you guys are watching this, he's already signed with a new team. He wants to play with a contender. And I'd imagine there are a lot of playoff teams that want to sign Odell. So I expect him to be signed very quickly. He's a declining wide receiver, though. He's changing teams mid-season. As of recording this again, I still don't know when or who he's going to sign to. And so you just have to drop him in the rankings. When he returns, I'll update them, and you guys will see exactly where I think he is. But, we talk a lot about wide receivers changing teams in the off season, not having enough time. What about wide receivers changing teams in week 10 of the current season? It's still difficult to develop a rapport for a team. And then we don't know, is he going to be the wide receiver 1 or the wide receiver 4? I mean, we don't know where he's going. And so I think 47 is a good spot for him, still has the upside. Final player we'll go over today is Sterling Shepard. He's down 18 spots to the wide receiver 56. He's struggled through hamstring injuries to start the season. This latest one's a quad injury. The massive drop is a combination of these repeated injuries, just not being able to stay healthy, not being healthy right now, going on by this next week, but then also just the other weapons around him are returning, right? They're returning Barkley and Tony. Tony's already returned. Galladay's already returned. All these guys are coming back. And so Shepard's someone that kind of needs volume. He's really, really good when everyone else is out because he can command targets. He's good enough to get open, but he needs a lot of targets. He's not someone that hits for 60-yard touchdowns, right? He needs to have 7, 8, 9 targets. And so if Barkley is there and Ingram's getting targets and Tony's getting targets, Galladay's getting targets, Slayton's getting targets, there won't be 10 targets available for Shepard. And so had to drop him. He's not really someone you need. You can probably drop him in a lot of formats because the wide receiver 56 is a pretty low ranking. So those are the biggest fallers in my rest of season rankings over the last 2 weeks. Again, you can see my complete rest of season rankings, which again have been updated to be a trade calculator on the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.